You ever look at a professional golf course or maybe a baseball field and just wonder, how in the world did they get that grass so perfect? It literally looks like a carpet. Well, I can tell you it's not magic. It's actually a meticulously executed plan. In this explainer, we're going to pull back the curtain on that whole professional process using a real technical guide for turf managers as our blueprint to build the perfect lawn right from the ground up.
So, what is the real secret? Is it some special, expensive seed? A superpowered fertilizer you can't get at the store? Nope. The answer is a little more complex, but honestly, it's a lot more reliable. See, the real secret is that a perfect lawn isn't something you just go out and buy. It's something you build, one strategic step at a time. And today, we're going to walk through that 5-step process together. First, we'll talk about creating the perfect plan. Then we'll get our hands dirty preparing the ground. After that, we'll cover planting itself, then navigate those critical first few weeks, and finally, we'll look at how to monitor and maintain it for long-term success. Sound good? Okay, let's dive in. All right, first up, the plan. And listen, this is where the magic really happens. It's what separates a professional result from what most of us have in our backyards. Well, amateurs might just, throw down some seed and hope for the best. The pros start with data, with strategy, and with a really deep understanding of the site. That's right, they don't guess, they test. Before a single seed is even bought, the very first step is to diagnose what you're actually working with. A pro has to know the exact condition of the soil, because that one single factor is going to determine everything else, from the type of grass they plant to the nutrients they'll need to add later. And this is the exact 5-step process they follow. It all starts with collecting soil samples to send off for lab testing. Next, they assess the site for any physical problems, things like bad drainage or way too much shade. And it's only then, armed with all that data, that they select the perfect grass species and create the final detailed plan to get it all done. And one of the most critical things they're testing for is something called soil pH. The easiest way to think of it is like a gatekeeper for nutrients. If your pH is out of whack, it doesn't matter how much fertilizer you throw down, the soil literally locks up the nutrients, and the grass just can't get to them. So, what's the sweet spot? Well, for most types of turf grass, you're aiming for a slightly acidic to neutral range, right there between 6.0 and 7.0. In this zone, all those key nutrients like nitrogen are unlocked and totally available for the grass to soak up. Honestly, getting the pH right is the first huge victory in building a healthy lawn. So once that plan is locked and loaded, it's time for section 2. Preparing the ground. And this is about so much more than just raking it flat. This is about creating the absolute perfect canvas for those new grass roots to thrive in. And you really, really can't cut corners here. Any problems you just bury during this phase, we're talking weeds, rocks, compacted soil, they will absolutely come back to haunt you later on. This is the stage that separates a lawn that looks good for a season from one that looks great for decades. The professional prep list is pretty thorough. It starts with a weed control strategy to get rid of all the competition. And you'll notice safety is a huge part of this. Checking equipment and using protective gear is just non-negotiable. And then finally, this is when all those soil additives from the plan, like lime or compost, are mixed in to create that perfect foundation. The goal of all this hard work is to achieve something the pros call good tilth. It sounds like a super technical term, but all it really means is creating a soil that's nice and crumbly, well aerated, and just ready to welcome in new roots and water. It's the perfect seedbed. All right, with our canvas perfectly prepped, it is finally time to plant. And here again, the pros have a bunch of different methods to choose from, and each one has its own advantages depending on what the overall plan calls for. For most projects, though, it usually boils down to 2 main choices, seed or sod. On the one hand, seeding is definitely the more budget-friendly option and gives you a huge variety of grass types to choose from. On the other hand, you've got sod, which is your instant lawn. You just roll it out, and it's fantastic for choking out weeds right from the start. The right choice really just depends on the project's budget, timeline, and goals. And what's really cool is that it doesn't even stop there. Pros have other tricks up their sleeve, like something called sprigging, where they plant individual grass stems and let them spread, or even hydroseeding, where they spray this green slurry of seed, mulch, and fertilizer right onto the soil. Pretty neat stuff. But here's the thing, no matter which method they use, the very next step is always the same, and it is absolutely 100% non-negotiable. Our source document puts it very plainly, but let me translate. Water. Immediately. That new turf has no deep roots yet, which makes it incredibly vulnerable to drying out. And that brings us right into our next crucial phase, the aftercare.
The first month is really when a new lawn is at its most fragile. Success here is all about gentle, consistent nurturing to help it get established and strong. The timeline of care is pretty predictable and very precise. After that big initial watering on day 1, the first week is all about protecting the area and checking the moisture every single day. Then, around week 3, it gets its first very gentle mow. And by week 4, it's ready for a light top dressing, that's just a thin layer of organic matter, and some nutrients to fuel its growth. This chart really puts the priorities into perspective. As you can clearly see, watering is, by a huge margin, the most critical task. But right behind it is protecting the site, from foot traffic, from pets, whatever, and constantly monitoring for any early signs of trouble. Now, that first mow can feel a little nerve-wracking, but its purpose is totally strategic. You're not trying to get a perfect manicured cut. The whole goal is just to trim the top blades, which sends a signal to the plant to stop growing up and start spreading out, which is what creates that thick, dense turf that we're all after. And finally, once that turf is established, the job shifts. It goes from that intensive daily care to more of a long-term maintenance mindset. This is all about making sure the investment in all that planning and prep work pays off for years and years to come. The focus of that ongoing care is really clear. As you can see, the biggest slice of the pie is proactive monitoring, constantly just checking the quality of the turf. That's followed by quickly repairing any damage, keeping detailed records of all the work you've done, and then using that info to tweak your practices as needed. So, what does that look like in the real world? Well, it's a continuous cycle of observation and response. You're constantly checking for problems like weeds or pests, you're assessing soil moisture, you're fixing any weak spots you find, and you're documenting everything. This is the real secret to how pros always seem to be one step ahead of any issues. And that right there is really the ultimate takeaway from the entire professional approach. A lawn isn't some static thing that you just install and then forget about. It's a dynamic, living ecosystem that you have to manage and nurture over time. So it turns out the secret to a professional-grade lawn isn't something you can buy in a bag. It's a process you can follow. It's all about seeing it as a project, not a product. So the only question left is, are you ready to start your plan?